Okay, so my name is Ernestine Lyons, and I am a councilwoman, and I'm also the host of uh, it's a web series that also is a podcast, and I talk about social and contemporary issues. And I wanted to be able to have a conversation and a workshop to address the divide that is happening in our country. On one side, acknowledging law enforcement isn't easy, and the jobs of public safety it's not really easy to be in that line of work. But on the other hand, there's a lot of data that shows that there are biases and there's discrimination in policing. And in some ways, I really want to be able to build trust in communities. I know in my community, and as well as other communities around the country and around, just Michigan and wherever these conversations are being had. And, I know that they are being had nationwide. We want to be able to understand, the full scope of things. So this is meant to be a very informal means of workshopping out what can we do better. So I really would like to hear legitimate concerns from the folks here in this workshop. And what we're going to do is work through this to really be able to get into the nitty gritty of what can we do to make our society better. And so we're just going to go ahead and dive right into some concepts, and then we're going to, have more of a discussion that can really help guide us along the way of, just so what we're going to do is go around and do a quick introduction, if you guys are okay with that, and what you hope to gain from the workshop.
All right, I'll introduce myself. So hi, I'm Lauren Church. I've lived in Harper Woods now for 5 or 6 years. I have a Black Lives Matter sign in my front yard. I care about social justice, and it's definitely something that the events of the last few years, but especially this last year, I've realized that I need to be a more active participant in my community and making deliberate, important choices in my actions and what I do to sort of help support that cause. So showing up to things like this and having open discussion is part of that. So that's why I'm here.
Awesome, thank you. Okay, I can call on someone. Let's go with Samantha.
Hi, so I am here. I am from the Bay Area, so this is very near and dear to my heart and always has been. But I love to get new information and things and tools that can help me because I feel like it's definitely an ongoing discussion. And I feel like this has been happening for more than, the past year, but it's really been heightened. So I want to do anything and everything that I can to help.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Samantha, for sharing that. Okay, Michelle.
Yeah, I'm Michelle Thompson. I live about 45 minutes south of Nashville. I am actually in a counseling program now to help first responders, but I'm taking this to kind of expand my knowledge on social justice.
Awesome. Thanks so much, everybody, for sharing. And I see we have, a wide group of, just locations and things like that. And I love that about Eventbrite kind of brings us all together. So I am just going to delve right into, the presentation here. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen and start the presentation. Okay, so like I said, I wanted to start having these conversations, and this started as a, just a follow-up to a series that, my community had here in Harper Woods, on just race, social justice, and then we kind of delved into a second part of that discussion that happened on Juneteenth, and it was focused around just how can we heal? How can we do better? How can we, dismantle systems that, in some ways can be oppressive, but then at the same time, some systems that, obviously aren't working for everyone, no matter what background. And so we had that first workshop, and, it was one where you got to hear so many different perspectives, and there were a lot of people who wanted to know, how we can all do better, how we can all step up, and what does that look like? And then the second part was really delving into books. We talked about and discussed the book White Fragility, and then we also talked about the book How to Be an Anti-Racist. So we had some moments too. I'm sorry, I'm just going to mute here. My dog's going to do something crazy. Okay, she's not. She's been barking really crazy. So we had this discussion, and then now I think the next part is to, just kind of delve right into, talking more about what is social justice, and, what does community policing actually look like, and then kind of looking at some real life examples. And then I think it's important to hear both sides of the equations, because in some ways, you can't villainize one side and say, there's a problem with, just police, or this community needs to do better. So I think it's worth having a discussion and looking at a lot of different factors that go into creating more of an equal playing field for everyone. Okay, so some of the main topics are going to be just policing and public safety, and like I said, community police relations, and then training and transparency. So let's kind of delve right into, okay, and so I don't know if I really properly introduced myself, and this is a part of something that's going to morph into something that's a lot larger than what we have here. Because like I said, a workshop, we want to be able to, kind of think about ideas and, come up with solutions, and then have commitments. So I think the biggest thing here is to have this, we want chaos to turn into clarity. And, I'm the facilitator, and I've been having conversations with not only the police in my own community, but also police all over the state of Michigan, and, just to have a better understanding of, what is the problem from their end? Like, what do they think needs to be done to foster that better sense of social justice? So, I think in some ways, this community partnerships and problem solving, I think it's a good way to really help facilitate, just something that you see that there's an issue, and you want to be able to kind of mitigate the storms, and be able to offer something that, can do something for a community that may be outside of the box. Maybe it's not something you've ever looked into before. And, so we do really want to also look at definitions too. So what I'm going to do is just define social justice here just for a second, and I'm going to find my note here. Okay, so social justice, we have a working definition that is, fair and just relations between individuals and society. And it's measured by distribution of wealth, opportunities, personal activities, social privileges. Okay, and we have someone just joining us here. Hello, welcome to our social justice workshop. Hello, I'm Ernestine Lyons, the host. Who do we have here? Okay, we have a number.
Jonathan Takish.
Hi, Jonathan. This is Ernestine. Welcome to the Social Justice Workshop. And do you want to introduce yourself?
Yes, I'm Jonathan Takish. I work with different public safety partners in the Pittsburgh region, and I saw this pop up on the Eventbrite that I had, and I felt might be something of value to take away. So I took an interest in signing up for it, and I'm eager to listen to the presentation.
Okay, thank you so much for joining. And we actually love having a perspective here from someone who actually works in public safety. You know, I kind of gave a brief overview of this format. This is a part of a series that will morph into more conversations. The first one talked about, you know, the concepts of, you know, just anti-racism and things like white fragility and, you know, anti-blackness. And now we delve a little bit more into just discussions around how we can not only support public safety in terms of more training and, you know, more policies that can really help, you know, kind of take away that narrative that, you know, there are so many bad apples that, you know, it's just a broken system. But I think in some ways we're looking to have more conversations on how we can improve systems and, you know, just really have more definitions. And we had just defined before you joined us social justice. We were looking at social justice being defined by personal activity, social privileges, and just really having a creation of safety nets and economic justice, social mobility, and breaking barriers. So in a lot of ways, it is, you know, when you have, you know, you need disruptive innovation to be able to mitigate the storms of, you know, change, because in some ways, we've always had evolution in our societies when we see that something isn't serving everyone, something isn't working. And so, you know, the whole point behind the conversation is we want to be able to, you know, start having these workshops. And I want to hear from you guys on, like, what do you think needs to be done better? So I'm going to jump ahead a little here. And so jumping right into ways to actively participate in supporting police is, I think in some ways, it's really being able to foster trust. And I've been grappling with a better term for supporting police because, you know, like I said, there are a lot of problems, and we're trying to dismantle, you know, systems that, you know, we recognize that there are biases, and we recognize that there's statistics, tons of them, that show that there are a lot of, you know, conversations that are not being had because there are biases and there are problems. So I know that in some ways it's really important to be able to align a community's policies with the community values. And in that way, I think it really behooves a lot of, you know, folks working in public safety and law enforcement to participate in that sense of, I'm a part of the community, for the community. And I know that's a mantra that in the city of Harper Woods, where I, you know, live and work, it's something that our police, you know, want to actively pursue. So this is something that also in the wake of the George Floyd incident, the Michigan Senate actually passed a bill on police training, and I believe it is currently in revision stages. And so it's an act to provide for the creation of a commission on law enforcement standards, and to be able to prescribe powers and duties and reporting responsibilities to certain local agencies, and require training for law enforcement officers. And what that means is setting up, you know, maybe police oversight commissions and, you know, other entities that can really help. And I'm sorry, can you guys all see the main presentation, or did it all go small?
It looked fine. It was full screen until just a second ago.
Okay, it was full screen because I want to be able to, you know, access one more of the notes that I had here.
Can I ask a question while you do that?
Absolutely, and this is supposed to be really informal, so we can just chime in and ask questions.
Cool. I was going to say, so I know that you said this came out of sort of the wake of the George Floyd, you know, the events that came after that. What I was curious about is, was there, at least in Michigan, and it's okay if you don't know this, I don't expect you to be the expert, but did something like that exist before? Was there any sort of formalized structure for law enforcement training?
So that's the thing. It's really left up to the municipalities, and I think in some ways it's it's now being brought to the national conscious. And this is something that now a lot more people are thinking about, like, wow, well, maybe we do need more cultural sensitivity training. Maybe we do need more, de-escalation training. And I'm actually going to show a clip from, a few perspectives coming from police officers. And they just kind of talk about, some of the struggles. And, these are simple fixes. So that's the thing. I think the conversation in America has shifted to, yes or no, black and white, and police are bad, or police are good. And so I think there really is an in between. And so there's just so much out there that we're kind of leaving on the table, when a lot more communities can have some of these laws and these opportunities to train police more. So this is something that I think that having this conversation around, like, oh, you've got a whole barrel of bad apples, when really there are other things in place that you really need to take into consideration. So yeah, I think this is something that it's only recently, like, oh, let's have this conversation statewide. So any other questions?
Well, so
Mhm.
yeah, something that I'm a bit concerned about is, so aligning with community policies, there are still a lot of places in this country that are very racist. And I'm concerned that if there are not stricter guidelines, I guess, in those areas, that, the police will come from that community of systemic racism, and they'll just stick with that and support that. So I feel like that's an aspect that we also have to consider as well.
Right, and I think that is something that it does. You're really right about that, because I think in some ways it's a culture of you're behind the blue line, and this is something that I've had several police officers that I've interviewed, and I just want to shed a little light on my background. I worked with the city of Detroit has a civil rights inclusion and opportunity department, and so I worked with that team there. We conducted civil rights investigations, and we looked into complaints about civil rights violations. And then we also, handled a lot of those conversations around race, justice, and, and then of course, working as a council person, I work closely with law enforcement. I have family and friends who are police officers. And I do feel like I had so much experience, and I've started this process of doing this really in-depth research for, like, understanding, okay, like, the police are not all bad, because I have friends and family, and these are living, breathing people. But at the same time, you look at all of these civil rights violations, you look at all of these injustices, you look at this history of not seeing the humanity in Black neighborhoods, and in situations where Black people are just kind of systemically being subject to like mistreatment at the hands of law enforcement. So I think that there really has to be a way that we understand both sides, and then we brainstorm as to what we can do to get through it. So I think you're absolutely right, where there are police forces that I was speaking with a Grosse Pointe police officer, which is a predominantly white area in Michigan, and he was just saying that a lot of times the unions protect problem employees, and good employees never really need union assistance. And then it's also a feeling of just like, okay, well, you need to speak up more, and but some people are afraid to. So I think that there are so many concerns and problems that we just really have to like work through them, and have these difficult conversations frequently. So any other questions? And thank you, Jonathan, for joining. And if you want to chime in and introduce yourself, I'm Ernestine Lyons, the host of this workshop. And we were just going through some things here, and we would just love to hear you, because it's going to be very informal. We want to hear questions, and we're going to also delve into more, what is your perspective of, law enforcement? What can we do better? What is working? What isn't? So welcome. Okay, so I'm just gonna jump right back into the presentation here. Okay. Okay, so when we talked about defining social justice. We also want to talk about some things that are, there's actually a policy called 8 Can't Wait, and there are 8 policies that really they run the gamut of things that can be easily implemented, and they can help break down some of these things that escalate. And then they just get out of control. So it ranges from banning chokeholds and limiting transfer of military equipment to local law enforcement, which in smaller municipalities like the one I live in, that's not so much of a problem. But I know in larger cities like say a Detroit or New York, that is the case. And then there's also the National Police Misconduct Registry. And these are some of the things that are steps that can be taken. And so I really want to be able to get into what does it mean to defund the police. There's a meme out there that talks about it's not necessarily about taking away the resources of the police, because I know in my municipality there are so many things that the police actually do need, and the funds a lot of times are going to legacy costs. And I know many cities are actually dealing with 30 years ago you had these huge pensions that were given to law enforcement that are now still being paid, whereas now officers are making $17 an hour or $15 an hour, and they're not necessarily even getting new equipment regularly. They're getting it every 15 years. And so I think really what it means is investing in something like we have in my community, which is a mental health court. And they have, the county assigns mental health court officers who deal with problem cases where, you have the opportunity to work with, someone from the Wayne County Sheriff's Department, or, other entities that can help making sure that people who have mental problems are not the police don't have to use their precious resources to go and respond to these things. And you kind of get ahead of the discussion before it becomes, okay, we have to shoot this guy because he was mentally unstable. Any questions? Anybody want to chime in?
Yeah, I was wanting to say that based on what I had just last said, I feel like this is a very all or nothing type of thing where there's so many problems that a lot of people get overwhelmed, and so they go, okay, then we just need to restructure the entire thing, which I do feel that is definitely true in a lot of ways, based on the history of where the police come from and what's happening now. But I think that also the all or nothing mentality can be a bit destructive, because there are some good things that are happening as well.
Exactly. And like I said, you just hear so many terrible stories about, like, I really had to de-escalate this situation and it was really tragic, and you're responding to domestic violence, and you're responding to things where normally a rational person just kind of loses their cool. And so there's so much, but at least starting the conversation is a way of thinking outside of the box, and then also thinking about things that maybe there was a stone left unturned, or maybe there was something that we can just really even have a more intentional and creative kind of thought process around what we can change.
So just to kind of piggyback on Samantha's point, I think that when we as a country talk about making changes like this, I think you're right in that it's all or nothing, but I worry about that type of thinking because it is paralyzing. And to Ernestine's point, so we just have to start the conversation. We have to start somewhere, or else we'll end up paralyzed like we have with gun reform or some of these other larger issues that really ended up in a kind of immediate gridlock and stalemate because we never were able to start having the conversations because the issues are so big. Immigration reform, these things that we know are broken, things that we know need to change, but unfortunately the conversations never really get past that initial hurt of whatever event has brought light to it last. so I hope that the momentum and sort of the real talk that's coming out of sort of these more recent events, even though they are heartbreaking and challenging, I hope that they spur more action and they actually get some traction.
Thank you so much for like adding that, Lauren. And you know, you're really right, because I do think that over the years you've seen so many, you know, oh well, it's too soon to talk about gun legislation right after a mass shooting. And you know, I think that's one thing somebody had made a comment to me about. Oh well, maybe with most people doing virtual school, you'll see less school shootings. And you know, and it's just like that shouldn't be, you know, something that we're like grateful that a pandemic has actually, you know, brought something that can stop a problem that can really be addressed by, you know, just holding your local elected officials and your law enforcement officials, and because these are also appointed positions, holding these folks accountable and making them, you know, do what's right for, you know, our country. Australia had in 1996 a mass shooting. They banned, you know, assault rifles and, you know, guns and things of that sort, and they haven't had any incident like this since. And you know, it's just that's a whole different, you know, kind of a whole different thing that is also being set to the side. And then, you know, we're just like, okay, well, we don't have a solution, so it'll just get set on the back burner. And you know, that's unfortunate. But I think, you know, I'd really have to push that, you know, we are, you know, trying to really be able to you know, just address things that need to have these consistent conversations. So with addressing systemic racism, that's something you really do have to take into consideration with you know, just some of these stats. So you look at, you know, federal prison, and you know, you look at inmates, and you look at some of these numbers here, and you know, you just have this rise in, you know, kind of having, you know, more people in prisons. And you know, it's not like people changed, nothing changed about people, it's more policies became more, you know, it's almost like you replace one system. And in Michelle Alexander's book, The New Jim Crow, she kind of talks about how, you know, when one system, you know, kind of, you know, was phased out, you got rid of slavery, and then you got rid of Jim Crow, and then you phase right into another system, which is mass incarceration. Because if you have, you know, a problematic people, then, you know, I think over policing can then become, you know, something that is the solution for a problem that in some ways it is created by a system that fails everyone. Because when you really think about it, the opioid crisis even is a byproduct of, you know, failed systems in our country, where, you know, at a certain point we stopped investing in mental health, and we stopped investing in our you know, older industrialized cities, where you had these you know, more working class white individuals, mostly male, who would get jobs working in factories, who would, you know, have these jobs where it was mostly industrial. And when you take away those jobs and you know, stop you investing in your own community, you divest and you move things overseas, then it creates other problems, and you start to see deaths of despair and, you know, rises in addiction to opioids. And so it's also something that creates other byproducts when you don't really, you know, look at how the system is failing everyone. And so in some ways, we've really been trying to get ahead of this particular problem in my community. And so trust and accountability between law enforcement and the communities that we're sworn to protect is essential to our officers. And, you know, this is something that you see with their interactions with our public. And, you know, proper policing practices require that law enforcement build positive relationships with the community and respect civil liberties, and then avoid some of these tactics that you know, are going to use too much force, are going to, you know, kind of alienate citizens and make them afraid of the police. And, you know, officers and the public need to work as a team, and keep in mind Sir Robert Peel's words, the police are the public and the public are the police. Okay, so I'm just going to stop here, and we can share some of our ideas and start to workshop. But before that, I do want to share a clip from some law enforcement officials kind of talking about some of their perspectives. I will fast forward through because it's a two-part workshop and it's a little long. So I just want to kind of show a little bit of that. So I'm going to stop sharing. And if we have any questions, feel free to ask. And I do want to hear from everyone on the call. So please introduce yourself if you haven't already. And just tell us a little bit about your perspective and what you hope to gain from this workshop, that is.
So for me, something that I think that's really important to look at it, I'm actually from Oakland. And now we have people like Kamala who are, potentially vice president. And she's done a lot of really bad things for, prison and crime. And it creates a lot of distrust because, there's so much crime in Oakland. And I imagine that being a police officer there is difficult, but, then you have people like Kamala who really have not helped the bias, and you would think that she would help that. And now she's potentially one of the highest people in the country. So I think for a lot of people that I know, it's very hard to create that trust because we want to believe in these people who say these things, and she says these things, but her actions don't match that.
And I think this is why, and this is meant to be like a really brief introduction to some of these broad concepts that we can revisit again and again with further workshops. But, I talked about bias and, sort of like, just having these kind of racial understandings. Those are also things that, apply to Black people too. And I think in some ways, there was a friend who, had a quote and said that, it was an older Black lady who said that, oh, Black people need to be policed. Black people need to be, watched over because we, and it's just like, this is something that is ingrained, not just in, people who are not Black, but Black people ourselves in some way. So it's really, these are the narratives. And I know that in Ibram Kendi's book that we discussed in another workshop, he talks in How to Be an Anti-Racist, he talks about how a lot of this internalized racism, it's like self-perpetuating, kind of like, okay, well, I'm the problem. And this is something that I think that, in the late 1990s and early 2000s, where you have Kamala Harris also, saying we need to be tough on crime. We need to, be making sure that, and I remember I saw a clip of her joking about sending kids to jail and, telling their parents that, if you cut class, you're going to be sent to jail, and the kids were scared, and she was just kind of joking about it and with a big smile on her face. And so, this is why, it's one person isn't going to be a fix. And it's more, you really have to look at internally, like, what are we doing as a society to support a broken system? And when I say we, I mean everybody. And I think it really does come down to being able to really break it down and understand it, looking at the research, and being proactive about talking to your police department and, saying that, maybe more training needs to happen. And we do need to have, a citizen complaint process. And we do need to, look into, some of the fixes that, just even addressing, biases that no matter who is in charge, who has the power, like, are we really looking at all of the factors? Are we looking at socioeconomic status and class, which can really, determine behaviors? Are we looking at the social determinants of health? And, are we taking all of these factors in the research into consideration when we are looking at creating the new normal? Any other comments? Thank you for that. That was actually really insightful. And I love this group. You guys are brilliant. So, okay, I'm gonna pull up this clip.
and doing the job. And the call to action in a lot of those protests is to defund the police, right? How do you react to that? Weeks ago, as the nation watched George Floyd lose his life at the hands of a Minneapolis police officer, wounds that never seemed to heal were once again reopened in this country. And in that moment, I decided I wanted to get a group of cops from around the country together on a video call to confront the issues and the problems that have long since plagued American law enforcement. I didn't want to provide a forum for carefully constructed and reviewed statements from spokespeople at City Hall. I wanted to hear an authentic, unfiltered conversation between cops from diverse backgrounds, dissecting the actions of not only those officers in Minneapolis, but the systemic issues within their profession, which have given rise to widespread outrage and protests on American streets, including people calling for the defunding of the police. This is part one of that conversation. I'm really excited to be with you guys here. Thank you for being so generous with your time on a Saturday.
No problems. Thank you for the opportunity.
Let's go ahead and introduce ourselves. And Joe Dutton, why don't we start with you?
Okay, I had 31 years. I am now retired. I work for a city called Golden Valley, which is an inner suburb of Minneapolis. I'm a use of force expert. I testified in court in reference to that.
Yeah, so I was the police officer for 6.5 years for the Tucson Police Department. I was a spokesperson of the police department. I was a field training officer. I did just about everything. And I left the police department in 2017. As a police officer, I was actually in the process of promoting a sergeant.
Yeah, I'm Aaron Cho. I've been on the job 20 years in February. Been a sergeant for 3.5 years in Los Angeles County. And my specialty is as a public information officer, patrol sergeant, and public relations expert.
So I just retired in March from the Dayton Police Department in Ohio. I was there for 21 years and 5 years in the U.S. Army before that. In April, I assumed the position of Director of Research and Procedural Justice for the Charleston Police Department here in Charleston, South Carolina, where my primary responsibility is to implement the findings of a huge racial bias audit that the city of Charleston conducted over the last couple of years.
I was a sheriff's deputy for the Charles County Sheriff's Office for approximately 7 years. I was in K-9 for my last 2 years there. I love that job. That's probably the best job in police work. And then just recently, I accepted a job at one of DC's smaller departments.
Been in the game 8 years, sergeant, SWAT team member, FTO, pretty much working in one of the most dangerous cities in Ohio and done it all in these 8 years, seriously, not even an exaggeration.
I've been in policing and law enforcement in general for over 20 years. Started out my career in policing with the New York City Police Department. Worked in all the major investigation bureaus within the NYPD, from the Detective Bureau, Internal Affairs, and Narcotics Division. I was the Deputy Chief of the Brooklyn District Attorney's Office. Currently, I'm the first Deputy Commissioner of the Westchester County Department of Corrections, and my views today represent my own personal views as a professional law enforcement expert and not the views of my department.
I'm a detective, 16 years on the job. I was patrol for 10 years, detective now. Chicago, and we're north suburb of Zion, north suburb of Chicago, very, very busy city. I was on SWAT, FTO back in the day, but now I run a outreach program.
It's great. I appreciate all of you guys being here. And I think the question I really want to throw out to the group first is, what is it like to be a police officer in America right now?
I'll go first. I know my first instance of when things changed was probably going from Trayvon to the Michael Brown incident. The Trayvon issue didn't really kind of affect us because I was a citizen. But, you know, when the Michael Brown incident happened, it seemed like people just kind of like switched on a dime. You know, you just felt like, man, I'm out here doing everything I can. And, you know, people just turned on me for something I had nothing to do with. And it felt like I was being blamed for something that was going on in a whole other country.
Yeah, you know, it's like a big circle. I mean, you start and the public loves you. Like Byron was saying, they pay for your coffee or they'll do this or do that. And then a critical incident happens or something negative. No matter where it happens in the nation, it affects everybody in the nation. And I can remember having to evolve through that at least, seriously, about 5 or 6 times.
I can tell you what, I think that what it appears to be is that policing in the negative sense is on steroids now compared to when I left in 2017. So I really hate to see the state of policing in America, because I believe that the police job, the police career, the calling is such an honorable thing. And it's one of the most integral careers to ever exist in America. Most police officers are doing the right thing. Most police agencies are holding people accountable. We have the knuckleheads out there, like you would have in any profession, that make us look bad. But it's sad to see such an honorable profession be treated this way in America.
Let's be really honest, like law enforcement in general has always been this way. Technology has advanced to a point where now we capture it. What we're seeing right now has been going on for decades. This ain't nothing new. You get what I'm saying? It's just now it's in the limelight. I didn't work with cops that's been racist. You know what I'm saying? I didn't work with cops that's been, sexist. You feel me? Like, this ain't something that's new. I'm not gonna say that I agree with the terms in which it has come out into the public, but I am happy that there is some light being shined, because there's no more hearsay, saying, hey man, the police took me around the corner and beat my ass. And that's all you got to go off of is your word. You get what I'm saying? Imagine if body cameras never got implemented. It's a different curse. You get what I'm saying? It's helped me. You get what I'm saying? More so than it's harmed me. But when I first got introduced to a body camera, I was kind of like, I ain't really want it though for real. But I had to learn to work with it. You get what I'm saying? But that's just my take on it,
I hear what you're saying, David, but do you think it's unique to police, or is it a people problem? Because if you're a racist cop, it means you're a racist person. If you've got prejudices, you carry those into the job, and sure, the job magnifies you. If you're a womanizer, the job amplifies that. If you're an idiot, the job amplifies that. I just don't see it being unique to law enforcement. I think law enforcement, and I've been in many professions. I teach at a very conservative Baptist university as well, and they go through a lengthy background process because you're working with students. But that still doesn't come close to what we go through as law enforcement officers. We go through a background process where we talk to everybody,
lost the video.
including exes who don't have anything favorable to say about you. So when we get into this job, I think they do a pretty good job weeding out the bad people, but no process is perfect. For as long as there's human, for as long as there's somebody that wants this job, they're going to say the right thing. It's what happens after the fact. And I think if we look at the 99.5% of officers that do a good job every day, and you look at that very, very small minority of officers that do stupid things, I can't say that that's unique to police work. And it sounds like you're saying that we're bringing this up to light. I think it's just human nature. As long as
I'm being honest with you. You know what I'm saying? I can only speak from experience. Guess what I'm saying? So for you, your experiences are different, so you have a different outlook. For me, my experiences are different, so I'm gonna have a different outlook. I'm not saying you're wrong, so I'm not wrong either. I can only go by what I've experienced.
Yeah, I'm just trying to get clarifications to what you're saying. I mean, my entire career was in Los Angeles County. I started in '99 when there was hardly any Asian officers. So believe me, I understand that there is a little bit of conflict when it comes to different races and stuff. I've been there. I grew up in the 70s, 80s, 90s. I've been through it all. But it's not unique to police. I didn't experience racism as soon as I became a police officer. It happened my entire life.
If I can jump in, I think it's so. As far as growing up, Black, we already have a different view of policing, because what a lot of people don't realize, and especially to some of my my white colleagues, is that and Joe, you're like my father's age. Segregation was just not that long ago. During my dad went to a segregated school. He's still walking around today. He's 70 years old. That wasn't that long ago. And during that time, police were used as the arm of a lot of segregationist policies. So we are taught in a lot of households in the Black community that cops are bad. Cops are bad. They're going to do this, whether it's warranted or not. So that's kind of like PTSD passed from our parents, our parents to us, that a cop, if he gets a hold of you, if he stops you, if he can do it and get away with it, he's going to do something bad to you. So that's kind of ingrained in a lot of us, valid or not, So that's one of the things that we're dealing with, So that's.
Here really
go ahead.
I'm going to throw this question to the group. By show of hands, Who here feels that there were bad apples in the policing agency that they worked in?
That there were?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I'm going to stop it there, and I can send links to, you know, this and part 2, but I did want to at least have this perspective, because I felt like it was a very powerful documentary. And my only thing, I felt like in some ways it did make me a little upset that Wendy, the only female officer who was on there, in part 2, there was I felt that she was trying to explain misogyny that goes on, and how female officers actually have, you know, a lot of statistics that show that they can help de-escalate a lot of situations, and are, you know, just officers who tend to have higher ranks as far as, you know, not having a lot of violence, not having, you know, things escalate out of control, that point to, you know, that lead to violence or death and things like that. And, you know, they just kind of shut her up. And, you know, in some ways, I think that kind of points to, you know, some of the things, but it's a really insightful, you know, sort of interview series done by Vice News. And, you know, I'm just going to link that here in the chat. But, you know, that kind of leads into sort of the discussion part of this workshop. So for those who just joined, I know Sharon, I hope I'm saying that right. If you want to make an introduction, I know you joined a little bit ago. Or if anybody has any observations or comments on, you know, what the police officers were sharing, and, you know, oh, wow. This thing needs to be, okay. Sorry, that was my talk to speech. It was, you know, saying everything I was saying. So I'm like, what on earth is this? So, yes, any thoughts?
I think that there was the one cop from Southern California who said that 99% of cops are good. I think that also, I think that that's very probably valid. And then I think that also needs to be recognized for, you know, when cops are dealing with Black people, they need to see that also, that 99% of Black people are great as well, and minorities are great as well. And so I think that that's kind of, it's true on both sides, but I don't think it's often seen on both sides by both sides.
Right. Thank you for that, Samantha, in that perspective. And I think this is the problem too, that the reason why I even wanted to have this discussion and really focus it on police. And, you know, because I've known a lot of good police, and, you know, I've seldom really had a lot of interactions with bad police, but, you know, they're out there. And, you know, you have instances, you know, where, you know, there's just bad things have happened. And, you know, but that's the thing about it, you know, it's really important to kind of have those perspectives being heard. And then, you know, even when you're listening to other people, you can hear the things that aren't said. And, you know, some of these things that, you know, even the police officers in this interview, they go on to, you know, talk about things that it's kind of telling, you know, what kind of culture they had been, chat button. I don't have too much of an opinion. Also joined late. Thank you for, okay, but sure. Feel free to chime in, even if you don't have an opinion, just because it's a workshop, and we want to hear from everybody, because we don't have the answers. In a lot of ways, we're looking for the answers from everybody's perspectives. And yeah, so I know that also, even Jonathan, I would like to even hear from you, or I believe it was the gentleman who joined us from the with the phone line. Someone mentioned that they worked in public safety, so we'll also like to hear those.
Yes, actually, that's me. I don't know what happened there, but I'm in the Zoom meeting, but I also am represented there as the number that's dialed in. So I have 2 little boxes up there, but
awesome. Yeah, so what are your thoughts on some of the things that the police officers in the video talked about, and, you know, just tell us about that perspective.
Well, it's really revealing and really interesting, and, you know, Samantha brought up a really good point that, yes, whenever something bad does happen that involves an officer, be it excessive force or an officer-involved shooting or whatever the case may be, that's not representative of the whole department. But at the same time, you know, a black or brown individual, there's not a monolith either. They're not a representative of the whole community and the whole culture. So if there is somebody that, you know, did something, that committed a crime, they're not representative of the larger community as well. So there needs to be that sort of cross understanding between those two different communities through, you know, in policing and in, you know, communities of color and things like that, to understand, you know, no, not all black folks are bad. No, not all cops are bad. But it's also important to point out too that whenever, you know, there's a lot of anecdotal evidence that whenever, you know, law enforcement does report somebody that, you know, maybe overstepped their bounds or did use excessive force, the circling of the wagon, so to speak, should be around those individuals because they're standing up and they're doing the right thing. It shouldn't be circling wagons to protect the individual, you know, that was committing that malfeasance. So, in my opinion, at least, you know, there needs to be definitely needs to be more support for the good cops, so to speak, that are stepping up and speaking out, saying, "Hey, I saw this, or I encountered this. This was a problem, and it's something that needs to be addressed." And they need to have that support, not just from the communities that they police in, but also from their own departments.
And so, Jonathan, in your area, in the area that you represent, are there a lot of like sort of transparency and accountability sort of systems in place, like maybe a police commission or community policing commission, or law enforcement and public safety sort of presence?
I work in the Pittsburgh area. There is, I think in the city of Pittsburgh, there is a Citizen Police Review Board. So they address a lot of those types of things. But I'm not sure who made the point earlier on, but it is kind of a municipality by municipality decision as far as how that works and what that looks like. You know, some departments that are smaller, you know, in Pennsylvania alone, there's hundreds of police departments. Because there's all small little departments here and there, just a little tiny municipality out in the middle of nowhere that has 2-3 officers, that kind of thing. So a lot of those rules and regs aren't, you know, applied at any universal level. So it's a lot of it has to do with, you know, how each individual department forms their policies regarding transparency and those types of things.
Thank you. Yes, I did make the point about municipalities. It's different from place to place because I know in my community, which is a little town of Harper Woods, and it has about 15,000 residents. And so it's a small town. And they're, you know, small towns like this in Michigan don't typically have these kind of things, but bigger cities like Detroit, they do have a citizen review commission. And, you know, there's a lot of civilian oversight that come from, you know, the government officials. They, you know, are active, and then there's also appointed people who are respected members of the community who, you know, kind of serve to keep things in check. And, you know, this isn't something that I've seen big examples of throughout Michigan, and, you know, now it's being something that, you know, people are having conversations around. And, you know, I do think that this is a fairly new phenomenon. So, you know, I think that's it's really interesting that, you know, that's kind of the perspective. It seems that a lot of people working in law enforcement actually would like to have, you know, these kind of presences in their communities. And so would you say that these are helpful to the police and public safety forces?
I would say yes, it is. When you have transparency, you know, it's greater because it benefits the whole, and it creates that accountability. Just look at, you know, the use of body cameras where previously they weren't used, and that, you know, there would be incidents or complaints, you know, that, you know, this happened or that happened, and in many instances it vindicated some of the individuals that were victims of excessive force or what have you, and then it also protected the officers who were accused erroneously by someone saying, "Oh, he did this or she did this to me," and so that kind of having that transparency really helped kind of protect both communities, the police community and then the communities that they were policing and they were engaging with. And so it may be my personal opinion, but transparency is not a bad thing, and accountability is not a bad thing. And so it really helps to protect those different institutions, the public and the police.
And so the police and public safety it's kind of a new thing too, that I have a kind of a regular workshop that talks about local politics, and it's called the Local Politics Info Session. It's a very creative name. Local Politics Info Session. It talks about the merger of police and fire, probably about 15 to 10 years back for a lot of smaller municipalities. And it's pretty much something that, there was a lot of resistance to, because it combines, it cross-trains firefighters and police, and they can do each other's jobs, and then they just have this big giant merged department. So there's no police, there's no fire. And so do you think that, and sorry, I'm just asking Jonathan from a perspective, because, I think we all want to learn, and anybody else can chime in too, and I think this is going to be the last question I'm going to keep picking your brain about, but do police and fire see these sorts of commissions as, annoying, or do they see them as like, oh, you're going to be a thorn in my side, any type of, sense of like maybe resentment?
I haven't really heard a lot of feedback, at least in my my line of work, from fire, police, emergency services, about their opinion one way or another of doing that combination sort of that you were talking about. But I think when it comes to anything, whenever you have an institution like the fire department, like the police department, that's been around for a very long time now, they're initially, they're resistant to change. One of the most dangerous things you can say is, we're doing it this way because we've always done it this way. So there is a little bit of perhaps resistance, just because it's new territory and folks may not be necessarily comfortable, or it's out of their comfort zone. But if I had to guess, there would probably be some resistance to it, because there is that identity. I'm a firefighter, I'm a policeman, that kind of thing. And so you may have some resistance from, I want to say, maybe the more older groups, the more, the folks that have had a longer career in those fields. But I think you probably would, after, if it were to be implemented, hypothetically, I think there may be a lot of folks that think, oh, this wasn't that bad of an idea. This was beneficial to do this. Just like a lot of departments before, police departments were very resistant to body cameras, and worked a lot with the unions and worked with different special interest groups to prevent legislation from being passed requiring body cameras. And then after the fact, they said, well, actually, this was a pretty good thing, because it kept us safe and protected a lot of folks from any kind of malfeasance, be it from either side. So there's going to be resistance to anything you try and do and implement, and there's going to be those sort of this tribalism around that, those different groups and things like that, that there's identities. But I think eventually, over time, it's possibly something that folks may have a change of heart about.
So I think I was looking for a little bit more clarity on just like things like citizen and police review boards. Do the public safety officers, like police or fire, do they have, a sense of like resentment towards, oh, you're telling me what to do, oh, you're watching over me? Or at least in your experience, is that something that you feel, or maybe have heard of, being something that, I don't want this, and I'm also resistant to that as well. Now you've not only turned me into a public safety person, but now I have this commission watching over me. Okay, I just got a notice saying that my internet was stable, and I also want to welcome Tafari Brent. And if you want to introduce yourself, we have just gone through most of the presentation, but I do want to get your perspective on, this sort of how we can change, the narrative, and if you want to introduce yourself to, that it's like it's really difficult to navigate in some ways, like our police need to be better, but at the same time, like, how can our communities kind of step up to just be the force for good in asking for what we need to be protected by the people who are sworn to protect us.
Yeah, by the way, my name is Brother Tafari Brent, co-founder of Detroit Coalition of Peace and Dignity for Detroit branch of the NAACP member, lifetime member, and of course, men's minister and fellowship church, amongst many things. But I think one of the first things we have to do is not ask. We demand police departments work for us. We're not going to continue to allow them to use our tax dollars to terrorize the communities that they've been tasked to serve and protect. So we're not, as community folk, we shouldn't be asking them to do anything. We should be demanding that they do what they have been tasked to do and what they signed up to do. I was in a meeting with Southfield Police, with the Southfield Police Department around 8 Can't Wait use of force police reforms, which they have completely complied with, along with Detroit. And I met with Chief Haddad out of Dearborn, and they are in the process of coming into full compliance. And hopefully soon we'll be meeting with Harper Woods, Ben Smith, and hopefully you'll be a part of that, Councilwoman. And of course, Wayne County Sheriff, Wayne County Sheriff's Department as well, to bring them into compliance. But yeah, I mean, one of the things that the police departments can do in this particular season, especially, is look at those evidence-based practices to have reduced police killings, unjustified killings, anywhere between 16 and 64%, depending upon the municipality. These practices are practices created and designed by law enforcement experts, not just police practitioners, but also, researchers and scholars who actually have dedicated their lives to doing this work to ensure that, healthy, safe, robust community policing models are practiced by police departments throughout the country. So if we encourage and demand that our police departments submit to the Pelian policing model and not the slave patrol policing model, then they will be police departments that make serving and protecting the citizens the priority, and not terrorizing, brutalizing, suppressing, and oppressing communities. So we can start with something real simple. I'm not big on having broad discussions, but let's identify best practices, and we have one. 8 Can't Wait. Let's start with that, and let's do all that we can to ensure that our community police departments adjust and modify and change their police use of force policies to reflect that. And that's easy deliverable, really. It's something that not only protects the citizens, but also protects the officers. It's in the best interest of all stakeholders and parties involved. So I would just encourage us to consider, to demand that our police departments comply with practices that are really in the best interest of everybody.
Thank you for that. And actually, we did just go over, we went over just like talking about 8 Can't Wait, and we talked about like tactics and, training and things that can be implemented in departments, and why these things need to be adopted. And so just our group here, this was a part of an Eventbrite that, got a lot of sign up from all over the country, actually. We have a few on here from Harper Woods, but mostly, from all over the country. And, just really interested in, not only the social justice aspect of, the struggle that, we're going to continue to wage and continue to fight for rights, but also over, just policing and how can, our police be better, and like, what do terms like abolish the police mean, or defund the police, and, what are some, ways to, just kind of tackle use of force. And we also shared a perspective from Vice News that kind of talked about, ways that the police are trying to, just tackle systemic injustice, and how we can, just as individuals begin to have those conversations, because this is part 3 of a series that I started having in Harper Woods, focused on, first we looked at what are some of these definitions like white fragility, and what is anti-racism, what is anti-blackness, and then we kind of discussed those things in our groups. We had breakout groups that really kind of broke down the topics and talked about how it relates to us and what our commitments are. So that's kind of where we are now as we wrap up this workshop. I do want to hear a lot more participation, and see where we can all be committed to just continuing these conversations, because this is just the beginning, and we're going to have a part 2 of this, and more conversations around just what we can do, and even merge this idea into something that's coming up in my community, and specifically talking about just public safety workshops, and not just the safety part of things, but looking at the social justice side of how we can truly make just talk about the social determinants of health, and talk about and actually work towards that legislation that's going to get us one step closer to dismantling systems of oppression. Okay, we did have 2 other people besides Teferi joining us here. So if anybody else has any feedback on anything, I'd love to hear from DL Turner. I think you were new to the group. If you want to introduce yourself, just let us know who you are. Okay, anybody else as far as generally, when we do have these workshops, you're really encouraged to kind of just like speak up, and we want to hear from you. And then when we do have bigger amounts of folks in the workshop, we break into groups. But we don't really need to this time, because it's a rather small, cohort here. But I do want to, specifically, kind of talk about how I'm committed to having more conversations around what can police unions do, because whether your political affiliations, no matter what they are, I do think that in some ways our unions do need to be more accountable, because I scoured the Fraternal Order of Police's website, and I didn't see anything that talked about any type of national movement to address some of these systemic problems, any of the biases. And I've had several conversations with police officers all over Michigan, and this is something that unions protect these problem employees, and that's a problem in itself. When you have.
I think,
Go ahead.
no, I mean, I think that's a brilliant point you bring up, Councilmember Lyons, and in all of the meetings that we've had with police chiefs throughout the metropolitan Detroit area, I've asked that the police union leadership show up, and we've actually had the presidents from these unions show up at these sit downs and at these negotiations, if you would like to call them that, and we actually comb through every element of their use of force policies. And I've yet to have one union president disagree. Once it's appropriately explained to them what it is and how it benefits their membership as well as the community, they've all bought into it. Detroit, which is one of the bigger ones, of course, Southfield and Dearborn, they've all bought into it, because it makes perfect sense. It protects all of the stakeholders, the communities, and even their officers. I think, but to your point, one of the things that we're doing at a legislative level, and I expressed this to Senator Chang and others, is that we need to look at changing the MCOs procedures and policies, to ensure that officers who create heinous violations to MCOs are decertified, and they can't hide themselves in other departments after they get released from a department for misconduct, and then replicate that behavior in other departments and terrorize citizens in other departments in other cities. So I think that's one of the things that we need to look at moving forward, these officers need to be discertified and disqualified from serving and protecting our citizens once they, prove themselves to be not, to not be worthy of that privilege. And I think that's ultimately where we must go, because if you have that kind of language in database, because there'll be a need to track them, because they won't be there. They'll be removed and disallowed.
I think we lost your volume. But you do make some good points. Is everybody hearing okay?
He's on mute now, but yes.
Oh, okay. All right. I think you were on mute. Can you hear us now?
Yeah.
Okay, I can hear you now. Because I think halfway through the conversation, we did lose you. You went on mute. But you make a good point about, just having these officers, and this is like conversations after conversation with police I've had, it's like these officers get their jobs back, and year after year, this happens time and time again. And, I brought up the unions because, on their website and on the national levels, you're not seeing any commitment to, any of these kind of changes. And sure, I think they may give lip service on local levels, but, if there's not, from the top, any type of, not even addressing it. And then I do know that the Fraternal Order of Police, did give an endorsement, and I don't want to get too political into this in this particular workshop, but there were just kind of like commitments that were made, and it kind of points to having a perspective that can be problematic when you're not really looking at why people are out protesting. Protest is a right that we all have, and people should, if they're upset, because how else will things actually be solved? And I'm actually glad that you brought up just the legislation, because earlier in the workshop, and I'll send you a copy of the presentation, we did talk about the Michigan legislature, and that I know that Senator Chang and Senator Ollier were part of this, sort of something in the Michigan Senate that talked about just having a little bit more of that. You really have to invest in making sure that there's proper police training, making sure that there's accountability, in other words. So with that,
Can I piggyback on that thought? Sure. Just real quick. So just you saying that Vice video that you showed us a minute ago. So we had every one of those cops rose their hand when they said that they knew about bad cops. Every one of them. But how many people in that video were retired? Like I've noticed that as they were going through it, and it's like, okay, so these cops don't necessarily have protection to be able to speak freely about it until after they're retired.
And even the one guy who said, my views don't represent the police force, even though he wasn't retired.
Right. He had to be very clear about that, and that's because the unions don't necessarily have their back. They're built to protect these bad cops, as opposed to being able to allow us to have constructive conversations and change.
Yeah, and it's simple language, and I thank you, Ms. Church, for that. And it's really simple language that we can use. I'm really big on simplicity. KISS, keep it simple, stupid. And we just have to make it clear to them, listen, your business has to be the business as a police union of first saving lives of citizens, and then saving jobs. But when you make the priority saving jobs over saving lives, that becomes inherently and ultimately systemically and institutionally problematic. Like I was saying about that officer in Southfield, when we were at the table negotiating terms around use of force, I heard an officer say something I've never heard an officer say, right? It almost brought me to tears. He says that a good police officer makes it clear through behavior and through words that I am willing to not go home to my family to ensure that you go home to your family, right? Wow. And it blew me away, right? And that's how good police officers talk, right? That's how good police officers talk. So until that sentiment is spread throughout the subculture of policing throughout this country, we will continue to have these demonstrations, these uprisings, and these protests.
And thank you for that perspective. And so I do want to hear closing thoughts and, what are some of the commitments that we all have to, just really advocating for making sure that, I read the quote here that talked about how, police are of the community for the community. And that is, I know, my commitment. I want to make sure that we are, creating a culture of not only transparency and oversight and, making sure that we have those kind of folks who represent our community. But, just knowing what we can be committed to after, talking about, addresses systemic racism and, just talking about the roles of unions and, just more community policing and, having those officers be a part of the community. So any closing thoughts and final words as we close this workshop out?
Something that I feel like is really important to note, because in Oakland, there's kind of this disconnect. We try to have conversations with law enforcement about, when can we step in if we see somebody crossing the line, for example, George Floyd, or using excessive force, since there really is, like as you were talking about, these unions that kind of protect that a little bit, and not always the clearest of laws. When can we as citizens step in without facing immediate repercussions? What training can we give to other officers to make sure that they are equipped, or what supervision can these officers have so that they're, somebody isn't abusing that force? And oftentimes the law enforcement near us is very closed off to hearing about that, and I think that comes with the difficulty of the job with, the amount of crime. But that's often why we're so vocal and why we protest so much in the Bay Area. But it's a conversation that I feel like needs to be addressed and continued to have of when can we step in? Like when can we as citizens step in safely, and when can other officers step in safely, and what are the guidelines for that?
That's a good question. And I do think that in some ways, making sure that like when you are protesting, making sure you have this list of demands. And I think that it's important to, ask for citizen review boards and ask for things like, that'll foster that sense of you're going to answer for this because you have us to answer to. So I really think that, that's how citizens can step in. And, just making sure that when you do have these, citizen made up, it's made up of citizens, it's made up of normal people, making sure that, you're holding their feet to the fire. And, that's really what you can do.
We need to get review boards, right? We need like Detroit, amount of the country, but our police bodies that are codified through our charters that have investigatory and disciplinary powers. Like if a body doesn't have the power to hold officers accountable for misconduct and non-compliance, it's just it's all talk. Right? There needs to be, like I heard Chief Barron say something that was profound. He said, brother, he said, we can write all the policies we want. We can modify them. They can be, the best practices in the world. He said, but if I, as a chief, do not hold my officers accountable for non-compliance, it means absolutely nothing. So we need to help this out, right? We need to have a body in place that notion that if you terrorize our citizens, if you do something that's unbecoming, right, of what you signed up to do, if you harm our citizens, you injure our citizens, you do something that is not representative of what it is you claim to stand for, there needs to be a heavy price to pay. So we have to go from oversight to fully empowered commissions that have some power and authority.
I love that you said commissions and making sure that you have, those folks who are going to make sure they step in. So thank you for that. Anyone else as we, wrap up in our last 5 minutes here?
You know, earlier Jonathan had kind of touched on accountability, and I think that's universally, you know, what we're saying is part of the need, you know, is accountability. But understanding now that, you know, that really, you know, it is municipality to municipality and the structure isn't there. I mean, I feel like these are things that just flew under the radar. And so sweeping reform, you know, stuff sort of like Michigan did, where it was like, okay, we need to have a unified, like, here's the bar for expectations, here's the bar for what your training is. That not only allows opportunities for us to even have just sort of a baseline for policing, but to, you know, if we look at defunding the police, if we look at ways to empower other parts of our societal structure with mental health programming and other resources for like families and parole and all these other pieces, I feel like that's part of it too, is like, we need to be able to have it kind of as a cohesive conversation. Like, if we're gonna look at the structure, let's do it right. You know, like let's really look at taking the pieces from defunding the police and actually kind of implementing that, having those conversations. I know it's a big scary term. You know, people hear defund the police, they kind of do this, but what it represents can be so beneficial in the long run for our communities and our country.
Thanks for that, Lauren. And so with that, we're going to go ahead and close it out. And, you know, I really want to thank all of you for joining this discussion. And I will send out the presentation. And then also the links to the 2 videos with the interviews with the police officers. And, you know, this is going to be something we continue to have. And so thank you so much for your different perspectives.
Hey, Ernestine, very quickly, if I may, council member, just very quickly, it's important that we also demand of our representatives that they stand strong when they're negotiating bargaining agreements with the unions, and make sure we get involved with the language that's being used, because all bad officers are protected by those contractual agreements. And if we get ahead of this thing and play chess, not checkers, we can positively impact the culture.
Thank you. And thank you for adding that too, because that was something I think to Samantha's point, I think it was, you asked about like, okay, other than protesting, what more can we do? And I think that really is, you know, talking about like working with your state legislatures and your local elected officials. This is something that I appreciate folks like Lauren and Teferi who live in my community, and they hold my feet to the fire for like what we can do to, you know, make these communities around us better. And then, you know, I go and talk to more people that are higher up than me. And, you know, I think that's really important as citizens to realize that you do have the power to go and, you know, talk to your elected officials and make sure that they're doing, you know, what they need to do and, you know, stepping up when these pivotal critical conversations are being had, and they need to be had, you know, making sure that we are, you know, not backing away and saying, oh, just like with Lauren's point about gun legislation, oh, it's too soon. It's not. This is the perfect time. It's the perfect time to really go, you know, hard for something. So, you know, like I said, I want to, you know, thank everybody, and, you know, thank you so much, brother Teferi, for coming to this session, and, you know, Lauren, thank you so much for coming, and everybody else from around the country. I hope you gathered something from this workshop, and yes, I've got a thank you in here. Thank you from the notes here, and so have a great rest of your weekend, and like I said, all the information and the slides will be sent to you. Okay, well, bye everybody.